In a small town just outside Manila, there lived a girl who had never touched a real piano in her life. Her name was Ligaya, which in Filipino means happiness, but her life was anything but happy. Ligaya was 16 years old. She lived with her mother in a tiny room at the back of an old building. The walls were thin. The roof leaked when it rained. And every night, Ligaya would fall asleep listening to the sound of rats running across the floor. Her mother worked at a garment factory. She left home before the sun came up and returned long after it went down. Her hands were rough and cracked from years of sewing clothes that she could never afford to buy. But she never complained. Not once. Because everything she did for her daughter. Ligaya was a bright student. She went to a public school where most of the children came from families just like hers. Poor, struggling, fighting to survive each day. But there were also some students from wealthy families. Their parents paid extra so they could attend what they called the special program. These students had their own section, their own uniforms, and their own world. And they made sure everyone knew it. Ligaya tried to stay invisible. She kept her head down, did her homework, and never caused trouble. But there was one thing she could not hide, one thing that burned inside her like a fire that refused to die. She loved music. More than anything else in this world, Ligaya loved the piano. She did not remember when it started. Maybe it was when she was 5 years old and heard a piano playing from a restaurant as she walked past with her mother. Maybe it was the old cassette tape her grandmother used to play before she passed away. Or maybe it was just something she was born with. A gift. A curse. A dream that made no sense for a girl like her. Because pianos were for rich people. Pianos cost more money than her mother made in 5 years. Pianos belonged in big houses with chandeliers and marble floors, not in a leaking room behind an old building. But Ligaya refused to let go of her dream. When she was 12, she did something that her classmates thought was crazy. She took a large piece of cardboard and drew a piano keyboard on it. 88 keys, black and white, perfect and silent. Every night, after finishing her homework by candlelight, Ligaya would place that cardboard on the floor and practice. She would watch videos at the public library during lunch breaks, memorizing how pianists moved their fingers. Then she would go home and repeat those movements on her cardboard keys. No sound came out, but in her mind, she could hear every note. Her mother watched her sometimes from the doorway. She never said anything, but her eyes would fill with tears, because she knew her daughter had a gift, and she knew she could not afford to give her the one thing she needed most. Years passed. Ligaya turned 16, and one day, her school made an announcement that changed everything. There was going to be a talent show, but this was not just any talent show. The winner would receive a full scholarship to one of the best music schools in the country. Free tuition, free housing, free everything. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. Ligaya heard the announcement during morning assembly. Her heart started beating so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. This was it. This was her chance. Her one chance to escape the life she was born into. Her one chance to make her mother proud. But then reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. She did not know how to play a real piano. She had never even touched one. How could she possibly compete against students who had been taking private lessons since they were children? Students whose families owned grand pianos in their living rooms? For 3 days, Ligaya said nothing. She went to class. She ate her lunch alone. She practiced on her cardboard piano at night, but her heart was heavy with doubt. Then her mother noticed. One evening, after coming home from a 12-hour shift, her mother sat down beside her. She did not say anything at first. She just looked at the cardboard piano on the floor. Then she took Ligaya's hands in her own. "You are going to enter that competition," her mother said. Her voice was tired but firm. You have been practicing your whole life for this moment. Do not let fear stop you now. Ligaya shook her head. Mama, I have never played a real piano. They will laugh at me. Her mother smiled. It was a sad smile, a knowing smile. Let them laugh, but make them remember you. The next morning, Ligaya walked into the music room and signed her name on the registration sheet. The students around her stared. Some of them whispered. One girl from the special program looked at her and laughed out loud. You? You want to play piano? The girl's name was well known in school. Her family owned 3 restaurants and a hotel. She had been playing piano since she was 4. Do you even know what a piano looks like? Ligaya said nothing. She just wrote her name and walked away. The news spread through the school like wildfire. The poor girl from the back section wanted to compete in the talent show. Everyone thought it was a joke. Teachers shook their heads. Students made fun of her behind her back. Even some of her own classmates told her she was making a mistake. But Ligaya did not care. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. 2 weeks before the competition, she went to see the music teacher. Her name was Mrs. Reyes, and she was in charge of organizing the talent show. Mrs. Reyes was not a cruel woman, but she was practical. She looked at Ligaya with doubt in her eyes. You want to perform piano? She asked. Have you ever taken lessons? No, ma'am, Ligaya admitted. But I have been practicing. On what instrument? Ligaya hesitated. She knew how this would sound. On a cardboard keyboard, ma'am. Mrs. Reyes stared at her for a long moment. Then she sighed. I cannot stop you from entering, but I must be honest with you. The other students have been training for years. They have real experience, real teachers. I do not want you to embarrass yourself. Ligaya nodded. I understand, ma'am, but I would still like to try. Mrs. Reyes was quiet. Then she stood up and walked to the window. There is one more thing you should know. We only have one grand piano, and it is reserved for the students in the special program. They have been practicing on it for months. Ligaya felt her heart sink. Then what will I use? Mrs. Reyes did not look at her. There is an old piano in the storage room. It has not been used in years. Some of the keys are broken. The sound is not very good. But it is the only option I can offer you. Ligaya understood what was happening. She was being set up to fail. They were giving her the worst instrument on purpose. They wanted her to quit. They wanted her to know her place. But instead of feeling angry, Ligaya felt something else rise up inside her, something stronger than fear, something stronger than doubt. She looked at Mrs. Reyes and said, I will take it. And with those 3 words, Ligaya set in motion a series of events that no one in that school would ever forget. The storage room was at the far end of the school building. Nobody ever went there. It was filled with old chairs, broken desks, and dusty boxes that had not been opened in years. The air smelled like mold and forgotten things. Ligaya stood at the door, holding a small flashlight her mother had given her. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from excitement, because behind that door was a real piano, the first real piano she would ever touch in her life. She pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, like it was complaining about being disturbed. Ligaya stepped inside and shone her flashlight around the room. And there it was. The piano sat in the corner, covered with a gray sheet that had turned brown from years of dust. Ligaya walked toward it slowly, like she was approaching something sacred. She reached out and pulled the sheet away. What she saw made her heart drop. The piano was old, very old. The wood was cracked in several places. Some of the white keys had turned yellow. Others had chips missing from them, and when Ligaya pressed down on a few keys, she discovered the worst part. 3 keys in the middle did not make any sound at all. They were completely dead. Two other keys got stuck when she pressed them. They would go down but not come back up, and the pedal on the right side was loose and broken. Ligaya sat down on the dusty bench and stared at the keyboard. This was her instrument. This was what she had to work with. While the other students practiced on a beautiful grand piano with perfect sound, she was given this broken thing that belonged in a garbage dump. For a moment, she wanted to cry. She wanted to run out of that room and never come back. She wanted to tear up her registration form and forget this whole idea. But then she remembered her mother's words. Let them laugh, but make them remember you. Ligaya took a deep breath. She placed her fingers on the keys and started to play. The sound was terrible. The notes that worked were out of tune. The dead keys created gaps in the melody. The stuck keys made awkward pauses. It sounded like a broken music box, not a piano. But Ligaya did not stop. She played for an hour, then 2 hours, then 3. She played until her fingers hurt and her back ached from sitting on the hard bench. She played until the sun went down and the storage room became so dark she could barely see the keys. When she finally went home that night, her mother was waiting for her. Dinner was on the table, rice and dried fish, the same meal they had almost every night because it was all they could afford. Her mother looked at her face and knew something was wrong. "Tell me," she said. Ligaya sat down and told her everything. About the storage room, about the broken piano, about the dead keys and the stuck keys and the loose pedal, about how impossible it all seemed. Her mother listened without saying a word. When Ligaya finished, there was silence in the room, only the sound of neighbors talking through the thin walls. Then her mother stood up and walked to the small wooden box where she kept her most precious things. She opened it and took out an old photograph. It was a picture of a young woman sitting at a piano, smiling at the camera. "This is your grandmother," her mother said. "Did you know she used to play?" Ligaya shook her head. She had never seen this photograph before. "She was very talented," her mother continued. "But she was also very poor, just like us. She never had a proper piano. She learned on an old organ at the church. It was missing keys, too. Some of the notes sounded wrong, but she practiced every day until she became the best player in our village." Ligaya looked at the photograph. Her grandmother looked so happy, so free. "One day," her mother said, "a rich family came to our village. They heard your grandmother play at a wedding. They were so impressed that they offered to pay for her to study music in the city. It was her dream come true." "What happened?" Ligaya asked. Her mother's face grew sad. "She got sick, very sick. She never made it to the city. She passed away when she was only 22 years old. But before she died, she told me something I have never forgotten." Ligaya waited. "She said that music is not about the instrument, it is about the heart. A broken piano can still sing if the person playing it has a soul that refuses to be silent." That night, Ligaya could not sleep. She lay on her thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. Her grandmother's words kept repeating in her mind. A broken piano can still sing, a soul that refuses to be silent. By morning, she had made a decision. She would not try to hide the broken keys. She would not pretend the piano was something it was not. Instead, she would make the broken piano part of her performance. She would turn its weakness into her strength. For the next 2 weeks, Ligaya worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Every day after school, she went to the storage room and practiced. She tried different songs, different approaches, different ways of playing around the dead keys. Nothing worked at first. The gaps in the music were too obvious. The melody kept falling apart. But Ligaya refused to give up. Then one night, while practicing a piece by Chopin, something magical happened. She was playing a slow, sad section when she accidentally hit one of the dead keys. No sound came out, but instead of stopping, Ligaya kept going. And in that moment of silence, something beautiful happened. The silence became part of the music. It was like a pause for breath, a moment of sadness that words could not express. Ligaya stopped playing. Her heart was beating fast. She had discovered something. The broken keys were not her enemy. They were her secret weapon. For the next few days, Ligaya rewrote her entire performance. She chose a piece that was emotional and dramatic. Then she rearranged it so that the dead keys fell on moments of pause. The silence would not be a mistake. It would be intentional. It would be art. The stuck keys were harder to work with, but Ligaya found a way. She used them to create unexpected rhythms, quick, sharp notes that added tension to the music. It was not how the piece was supposed to be played, but it was something new, something different, something that nobody had ever heard before. The night before the competition, Ligaya sat alone in the storage room one last time. The broken piano stood before her like an old friend. She had spent so many hours with it that she knew every crack, every chip, every imperfection. She played her piece from beginning to end, and for the first time, it was perfect. Not perfect in the traditional sense, but perfect in a way that felt true. Real, honest. When she finished, she heard a sound behind her. She turned around and saw her mother standing in the doorway. She had come straight from work, still wearing her factory clothes. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I heard you playing from outside," her mother whispered. "I have never heard anything so beautiful in my life." Ligaya ran to her mother and hugged her tight. They stood there in the dusty storage room, holding each other, crying together. "I am scared, Mama," Ligaya admitted. "What if they still laugh at me? What if I fail?" Her mother pulled back and looked into her eyes. "Then you fail. But you fail with your head held high. You fail knowing you gave everything you had. And that, my daughter, is not really failing at all." Ligaya nodded. She was still scared, but she was also ready. Tomorrow, she would walk onto that stage. Tomorrow, she would sit at that broken piano in front of hundreds of people. Tomorrow, she would show them all what a girl with a cardboard keyboard and a mother who believed in her could do. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of the competition arrived like any other morning. The sun rose over Manila, the streets filled with people rushing to work. The smell of fried rice and coffee drifted through the neighborhood. But for Ligaya, nothing about this morning felt ordinary. She woke up before her alarm. Her eyes opened at 5 in the morning, and she could not go back to sleep. Her stomach was tight with nerves. Her hands would not stop trembling. She lay on her mattress and stared at the ceiling, listening to her own heartbeat. Today was the day. The day she had been preparing for her entire life. The day that would decide her future. Her mother was already awake. Ligaya could hear her moving around in the small kitchen preparing breakfast. The smell of eggs frying in oil filled the room. It was a special breakfast. They usually could not afford eggs, but her mother had saved a little extra money this week just for this morning. Ligaya got up and walked to the kitchen. Her mother turned around and smiled at her, but Ligaya could see the worry in her eyes, the same worry that Ligaya felt in her own heart. "Eat," her mother said, placing a plate of eggs and rice on the table. "You need your strength." Ligaya tried to eat, but the food felt like stones in her mouth. She managed a few bites before pushing the plate away. Her mother did not say anything. She understood. After breakfast, Ligaya took a bath and got dressed. She did not have a fancy dress to wear. She did not have jewelry or makeup or expensive shoes. All she had was a simple white blouse that her mother had ironed the night before and a dark skirt that was slightly too big for her. Her mother helped her fix her hair. She braided it neatly and tied it with a small ribbon. It was nothing special. But when Ligaya looked in the mirror, she saw something in her own eyes that surprised her. Determination, fire, a quiet strength that she did not know she had. "You look beautiful," her mother said softly. Ligaya turned and hugged her. "Thank you, Mama, for everything." Her mother held her tight for a long moment. Then she pulled back and pressed something into Ligaya's hand. It was the old photograph of her grandmother at the piano. "Take this with you," her mother said. "She will be watching over you today." Ligaya tucked the photograph into her pocket, close to her heart. Then she picked up her bag and walked out the door. The school auditorium was already crowded when Ligaya arrived. Parents filled the seats, dressed in their finest clothes. Teachers stood along the walls, clipboards in hand. Students from the special program gathered near the stage, laughing and talking like they had already won. Ligaya found a seat at the back of the auditorium. She did not want to be seen. She did not want to talk to anyone. She just wanted to wait for her turn and try not to throw up from nervousness. The competition began at 9 o'clock sharp. The principal gave a short speech about the importance of arts and education. The judges were introduced. There were 3 of them: a music professor from a famous university, a concert pianist who had performed all over Asia, and a businessman who was sponsoring the scholarship. Then the performances started. The first student was a boy from the special program. He walked onto the stage with confidence, sat at the grand piano, and played a piece by Mozart. His technique was flawless. His fingers moved across the keys like water flowing over stones. When he finished, the audience clapped loudly. The judges nodded and wrote notes on their papers. Ligaya felt her heart sink. The second performer was a girl who played violin. She was only 14, but she played like she had been studying for decades. The music was so beautiful that some people in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. The third performer was another pianist, then a singer, then a boy who played classical guitar. One by one, the students from wealthy families took the stage and showed off years of expensive training and private lessons. Each performance was better than the last. Each student was more polished, more confident, more prepared than Ligaya could ever hope to be. By the time the 10th performer finished, Ligaya was ready to run. What was she thinking? How could she possibly compete against these people? She had never even touched a real piano until 2 weeks ago. She had learned everything from YouTube videos and a cardboard keyboard. This was madness. She stood up from her seat. She was going to leave. She was going to slip out the back door before anyone noticed. She would go home and tell her mother that she tried but could not do it. Her mother would understand. Her mother always understood. But as she turned to leave, she felt the photograph in her pocket press against her leg. Her grandmother's photograph. The woman who had learned to play on a broken organ with missing keys. The woman who had a soul that refused to be silent. Ligaya stopped. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she sat back down. An hour later, her name was called. "Our final performer today is Ligaya Santos," the announcer said. There was confusion in his voice, like he was not sure he was reading the name correctly. "She will be playing piano." A murmur went through the crowd. People looked around, trying to see who this unknown girl was. The students from the special program whispered to each other and laughed. Ligaya stood up. Her legs felt like they were made of rubber. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but she walked forward anyway, one step at a time, down the aisle toward the stage. When she reached the front of the auditorium, she saw something that made her stomach turn. 2 men were wheeling out the broken piano from the storage room. It looked even worse under the bright stage lights. The cracked wood, the chipped keys, the dust that still clung to its surface despite Ligaya's attempts to clean it. Next to the beautiful grand piano that the other students had used, it looked like a piece of garbage. The laughter started almost immediately. It began with a few giggles from the students in the front row. Then it spread through the auditorium like a wave. Parents covered their mouths trying to hide their smiles. Even some of the teachers looked away, embarrassed for her. The girl from the wealthy family, the one who had mocked Ligaya on the day she registered, laughed the loudest. "I told you," she said to her friends. "This is going to be hilarious." Ligaya stood at the edge of the stage, frozen. The laughter surrounded her like a wall. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring at her, judging her, pitying her. Her face burned with shame. Her hands trembled at her sides. For a moment she could not move. She could not think. She could not breathe. Then she looked out into the audience and saw her mother. Her mother was sitting in the very last row, still wearing her factory clothes, because she had come straight from her morning shift. She was the only person in the entire auditorium who was not laughing. She was not smiling. She was not looking away in embarrassment. She was looking straight at Ligaya with tears in her eyes and pride on her face. And in that moment, Ligaya understood something. She was not here to impress these people. She was not here to prove anything to the rich students or the fancy judges or the whispering crowd. She was here for one reason and one reason only. She was here to play. Ligaya walked across the stage. The laughter continued, but she no longer heard it. She reached the broken piano and sat down on the bench. The wood creaked under her weight. The keys stared up at her, yellow and chipped and imperfect. She placed her fingers on the keyboard. She closed her eyes. She thought of her mother working 12-hour shifts to put food on the table. She thought of her grandmother who never got to chase her dreams. She thought of every night she had spent practicing on a cardboard piano, imagining a moment just like this. The auditorium grew quiet. The laughter faded. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Ligaya took one final breath, and then she began to play. The first note rang out across the auditorium like a voice calling from another world. It was not a perfect note. The piano was out of tune, and the sound wobbled slightly in the air. But there was something in that single note that made people stop. Something that cut through the whispers and the giggles and the cruel smiles. Something real. Ligaya did not open her eyes. She kept them closed, blocking out the hundreds of faces staring at her. In her mind, she was not on a stage. She was back in the storage room, alone with her broken piano. She was back in her tiny home, practicing on cardboard keys while her mother slept. She was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Her fingers found the next note, then the next, then the next. The melody began to take shape. It was a piece by Chopin, one of the most difficult and emotional compositions ever written for piano. It was a piece about loss, about longing, about dreams that slip through your fingers like sand. Ligaya had chosen this piece for a reason. It matched the story of her life. The music started slowly, gently, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through clouds. Ligaya's fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness that surprised even her. She was not thinking about technique. She was not thinking about the judges or the scholarship or the people who had laughed at her. She was thinking about her mother. She was thinking about all those years of sacrifice, all those early mornings and late nights, all those meals of rice and dried fish so that Ligaya could stay in school, all those dreams her mother had given up so that her daughter could have a chance at something better. The music grew stronger. The notes came faster now, building like waves before a storm. Ligaya's hands danced across the keyboard, finding melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. And then she hit the first dead key. The note should have been there. In the original composition, it was a crucial part of the melody. But on this broken piano, there was only silence. A gap. An empty space where music should have been. But Ligaya did not panic. She did not stop. Instead, she let the silence hang in the air for just a moment longer than expected. And in that moment of silence, something magical happened. The silence became part of the music. It was like a pause between heartbeats, a breath held in anticipation, a tear that falls without sound. The audience felt it without understanding it. They leaned forward in their seats, caught in a spell they could not explain. Ligaya continued playing. Her fingers found the working keys and wove around the broken ones like water flowing around stones in a river. Every gap in the music became intentional. Every silence became meaningful. The broken piano was no longer fighting against her. It was singing with her. The rich girl who had laughed the loudest was no longer laughing. She sat in her seat with her mouth slightly open, her eyes fixed on the stage. She had been playing piano for 12 years. She had studied with the best teachers in the country, but she had never heard anyone play like this. One of the judges, the concert pianist who had performed all over Asia, put down his pen. He had stopped writing notes. He could not look away from the girl at the broken piano. The music reached its middle section. This was where Ligaya had made her biggest changes. The original composition called for a series of rapid notes in the middle octave. But 3 of those keys were dead, so Ligaya had rewritten the entire section. Instead of speed, she played with emotion. Instead of showing off her technique, she showed her heart. She slowed down the tempo and added pauses that were not in the original score. She turned a technical showcase into a meditation on sorrow and hope. Tears began to fall down her cheeks. She did not notice. She was too lost in the music, too connected to something bigger than herself. The piano was no longer an instrument. It was an extension of her body, her soul, her entire life. In the audience, something strange was happening. People who had come to laugh were now sitting in stunned silence. A mother in the 3rd row wiped her eyes with a tissue. An old man in the back remembered his own childhood, his own struggles, his own broken dreams. A teenage boy who had never cared about classical music found himself unable to breathe. The music did not just fill the auditorium, it filled the hearts of everyone who heard it. Ligaya played on. Her fingers flew across the keys as the composition reached its climax. The music grew louder, more intense, more desperate. It was the sound of someone fighting against impossible odds. It was the sound of a girl who had practiced on cardboard keys refusing to be forgotten. It was the sound of every person who had ever been told they were not good enough. The stuck keys that had caused her so much trouble now added unexpected accents to the music. Sharp, sudden notes that created tension and release. It was not how Chopin had written it. It was something new. Something that had never existed before. Something that could only come from this girl and this broken piano. Mrs. Reyes, the music teacher who had given Ligaya the damaged instrument, stood at the side of the auditorium with her hand over her mouth. She had expected embarrassment. She had expected failure. She had never expected this. The final section of the piece began. Ligaya slowed down, letting each note breathe. The melody became soft again, fragile, like a whisper in the dark. She thought of her grandmother, the woman in the photograph who had never gotten to chase her dreams. She thought of all the people like her, born into poverty, told to stay in their place, denied the chance to show what they could do. This performance was for all of them. The last few measures were the hardest. Ligaya's arms were tired. Her fingers ached. Sweat dripped down her forehead. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Not now. Not when she was so close. She reached the final phrase. 4 notes. Simple, quiet, heartbreaking. She played the first note, then the second, then the third. The 4th note was on a dead key. Ligaya knew this. She had planned for it. She had practiced this moment 100 times in the storage room. And now, in front of hundreds of people, she did exactly what she had planned to do. She pressed the dead key anyway. No sound came out, but her finger stayed on the key, holding it down as if the note was there, as if the music was still playing, as if the silence itself was the most important note of all. And in that silence, the piece ended. Ligaya sat at the piano with her eyes still closed. Her hands rested on the keys. Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. She did not move. She did not look up. She was afraid to see the faces in the audience, afraid to find out if she had succeeded or failed. The auditorium was completely silent. No one clapped. No one moved. No one made a sound. For 5 long seconds, there was nothing but stillness. Ligaya felt her heart breaking. She had given everything she had, every drop of her soul, every tear, every dream. And now it was over, and no one was responding. Maybe they were right. Maybe she did not belong here. Maybe she should have stayed invisible. She opened her eyes, and what she saw took her breath away. People were not silent because they were unimpressed. People were not still because they were bored. People were frozen because they did not know how to react to what they had just witnessed. The woman in the 3rd row was crying openly. The old man in the back had his face in his hands. The rich girl who had mocked her was staring at the stage with tears streaming down her cheeks. Even the judges sat motionless, their papers forgotten. Then, from the very last row of the auditorium, someone stood up. It was her mother, still in her factory clothes, still with rough hands and tired eyes, but standing tall and proud. And she began to clap. The sound of her mother's clapping echoed through the silent auditorium like thunder in an empty valley. One person clapping, just one. A woman in factory clothes standing in the last row, her rough hands coming together over and over again. Then another person stood up, a man in the middle section who did not know Ligaya, who had never seen her before today, who had come only to watch his nephew perform. He stood up and started clapping too. Then another, and another, and another. It spread like fire through dry grass. One by one, people rose from their seats. The woman who had been crying in the 3rd row, the old man who had remembered his own broken dreams, teachers who had expected nothing from the poor girl at the back of the class, parents who had come to see their own children and found themselves moved by someone else's. Within 30 seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause was deafening. It crashed against the walls like waves against rocks. People were not just clapping, they were cheering, they were crying, they were calling out words that Ligaya could not hear over the noise. Ligaya sat frozen at the piano. She could not believe what was happening. She looked out at the sea of standing people and felt like she was dreaming. This could not be real. This could not be happening to her. But it was real. It was happening. She saw Mrs. Reyes standing near the stage, tears streaming down her face. The same teacher who had given her the broken piano, who had expected her to fail, who had tried to make her quit. Now she was clapping harder than anyone, shaking her head in disbelief at what she had witnessed. She saw the rich girl who had mocked her on registration day. The girl was standing too, clapping slowly, her face pale with shock. There was no cruelty in her eyes anymore, only something that looked like respect, maybe even shame. She saw the judges at their table. The concert pianist was on his feet, applauding with tears in his eyes. The music professor was saying something to the businessman beside him, gesturing toward the stage with amazement. The businessman was nodding, his hand pressed against his chest like he was trying to hold his heart in place. The applause went on for 2 minutes, then 3, then 5. People did not want to stop. They did not want the moment to end. It was as if they all understood that they had witnessed something rare, something that might never happen again. Finally, Ligaya stood up from the piano bench. Her legs were shaking. Her whole body was trembling. She did not know what to do, so she did the only thing she could think of. She bowed. The applause grew even louder. She looked out into the audience one more time and found her mother's face. Her mother was still standing in the last row, still clapping, still crying. But now she was also smiling. The biggest, proudest smile Ligaya had ever seen. And in that moment, Ligaya knew that no matter what happened next, she had already won. The results were announced an hour later. The judges did not need much time to make their decision. They called all the performers back to the stage and asked them to stand in a line. Ligaya stood at the very end, still in her simple white blouse, still with her grandmother's photograph in her pocket. The principal took the microphone and began to speak. He talked about the importance of music education. He talked about the generosity of the sponsor. He talked about the bright futures of all the talented young people on stage. Ligaya barely heard any of it. Her heart was pounding too loud. Then the principal said the words she had been waiting her whole life to hear. The winner of this year's scholarship, by unanimous decision of all three judges, is Ligaya Santos. The auditorium erupted again. More cheering, more applause, more tears. Ligaya could not move. She stood on the stage with her mouth open, unable to process what had just happened. The other performers turned to look at her. Some of them smiled. Some of them clapped. A few looked disappointed, but even they could not deny what they had witnessed. The rich girl walked over to Ligaya. For a moment, Ligaya was afraid she would say something cruel, but instead, the girl did something unexpected. She reached out and took Ligaya's hand. "You deserved this," she said quietly. "I have never heard anyone play like that." Ligaya did not know what to say. She just nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The principal called her forward to receive her certificate. Cameras flashed. People took photographs. A reporter from a local newspaper asked if she could do an interview. Everything was happening so fast that Ligaya felt dizzy. But through it all, she kept looking for one face in the crowd. And when she finally found her mother making her way through the crowd toward the stage, Ligaya broke away from everyone and ran to her. They met in the middle of the auditorium and held each other tight. They did not say anything. They did not need to. Everything that needed to be said was in that embrace. All the years of struggle, all the sacrifices, all the dreams that had finally come true. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. A parent in the audience had recorded Ligaya's entire performance on his phone. That night, he posted the video online with a simple caption. "This girl played a broken piano and made the whole audience cry." By morning, the video had 10,000 views. By the end of the week, it had 1 million. By the end of the month, it had reached 50 million people around the world. News stations picked up the story. Newspapers wrote articles about the girl who turned a broken piano into a masterpiece. Radio hosts played clips of her performance during their morning shows. Social media was flooded with comments from people who had been moved by her music. Offers started pouring in. A famous music school in Europe sent her an invitation to study there for free. A piano company offered to give her a brand new instrument. A concert hall in Singapore asked if she would perform at their anniversary celebration. The concert pianist, who had been one of the judges, flew back to Manila just to meet her. He sat with her for 3 hours, listening to her story, watching her play on the old broken piano in the storage room. When he left, he told reporters that Ligaya was the most naturally gifted musician he had encountered in 30 years. But through all the attention and all the opportunities, Ligaya never forgot where she came from. When a journalist asked her what she was most proud of, she did not mention the scholarship. She did not mention the viral video or the millions of views or the famous people who wanted to meet her. She simply said, "My mother was in the audience. After all these years, she finally got to hear me play." 3 months later, Ligaya left for music school. Her mother came to the airport to say goodbye. They stood at the departure gate holding hands, neither one wanting to let go. "I will make you proud, Mama," Ligaya whispered. "I promise." Her mother shook her head. "You already have. You made me proud the day you drew that piano on cardboard and refused to give up. Everything after that was just the world catching up to what I already knew." Ligaya boarded the plane with tears in her eyes and her grandmother's photograph in her pocket. She looked out the window as Manila grew smaller beneath her. Somewhere down there was the tiny room where she had grown up. the cardboard piano she had practiced on for years, the storage room with the broken instrument that had changed her life. She was leaving it all behind, but she was taking the most important thing with her: the knowledge that talent is not about the instrument you are given. It is about the heart that refuses to stay silent. It is about the mother who works 12-hour shifts so her daughter can dream. It is about the girl who practices on cardboard keys and believes that someday, somehow, the world will hear her music. Sometimes the piano is broken. Sometimes the odds are impossible. Sometimes everyone expects you to fail. Play anyway.